over the years have not done enough. The 30 years that have built up of regulatory excess is something that both sides need to take down. And with that, I recognize the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Lankford, for 4 minutes to make his comments.
The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized for 4 minutes.
And I thank the gentleman from California for yielding. Madam Speaker, I do rise to support H.R. 72. When the framers of the Constitution started writing, they began Article 1, Section 1 with a simple and clear statement. All legislative powers herein shall be vested in a Congress. After great debate, the priority concern was the possibility that some other entity other than Congress would attempt to exercise legislative powers or compel their will on American citizens. If laws could be made by someone who has no accountability, they could create any rule based on their own preferences and force unchecked spending on the will of their fellow citizens and without accountability. This is an unfunded regulatory mandate. It is my concern that in the race to regulate, we've moved from regulating American business to running state and local governments and have made them, in effect, federal government extension employees charged with regulating all aspects of public and private business. Every stage of business is now regulated, from how to interview an applicant to how to fire an employee. Government paperwork abounds. Every company needs compliance officers and attorneys just to make sure they're running their business based on the preferences of someone from some agency they've never even heard of. That's not real job creation. American companies want to produce products and services, not hire de facto government employees. We need real job growth. It's time for Congress to assume its responsibility. If there's a grievous regulation, it shouldn't be EPA's fault, HHS's fault, or even the executive branch's fault. It's ours. Let me give you some examples of these unfunded mandates in my own home state of Oklahoma. The city of Bartlesville, Oklahoma is currently drowning under a new EPA requirement to filter the stormwater. That's correct, filtering the rainwater. The city of Bethany, Oklahoma spent over $250,000 in 1987 to put in 2 water wells, only to be required a few years later to take them out by EPA because of their wastewater. Then EPA changed their wastewater requirements in 2006 and cost the city of Bethany over $9 million. The street signs in Bethany must also change to a new type of reflective materials to meet DOT regulations, costing the city who knows how much. The Oklahoma Department of Transportation has to go through millions of dollars of hoops to tear down an old bridge to replace it with a new bridge in the exact same spot. They have to navigate the Clean Water Act, the National Historic Preservation Act, the Endangered Species Act, the Migratory Bird Act, and many more while people drive over an old deteriorating bridge. And I will tell you, I will be the first to promote wheelchair ramps on sidewalks. But federal interpretation of ADA to construct accessible curb ramps at intersections and other locations has been invoked where no connecting sidewalks even exist. In Oklahoma City, where I live, such a wholesale directive results in curb ramps that terminate in adjacent vacant lots to a ditch, embankments, and sometimes straight into a light pole. The desire to do the right thing sometimes leaves no room for exercising common sense. We're regulating common sense out of federal, state, and local governments, and we're costing state and local taxpayers millions in unfunded mandates. Sometimes our regulations don't cost money, but they do cost trust and relationship between citizens and their federal government. Last Christmas, a community bank in Oklahoma was told by a federal regulator that their employees had to take off the buttons that said, "Merry Christmas, God is with us," and remove the scripture verse announcement on their board because it might cause someone to feel discriminated against that walked into the bank. This is a privately owned business in America. Every person in that community has lost trust with the common sense leadership of the federal government because we've allowed unchecked regulation. The assumption that federal agencies are the only people who care about clean water, clean air, fair business practice, etc., is arrogant and misinformed. I don't know anyone who loves the air, water, and land in Oklahoma more than Oklahomans, and I'm confident that is true for other states as well. We must take a serious look at unfunded mandates and regulations. We need to hear the cry of our cities, counties, and states where they say, please stop the flood of regulations. They want 2 things, predictability and clearly defined limited scope. This is a bipartisan issue. We have common agreement with the other members of my subcommittee, and we will immediately take this up next Tuesday in our first subcommittee hearing. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield back my time.
Gentleman's time's expired, and the chair will advise the gentleman from California that he has 18¼ minutes remaining, and the chair will advise the gentleman from Maryland that he has 10 minutes remaining. And the gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I yield 3 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Ohio, Mr. KUCINICH.
Gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. Any review of our regulatory structures or the orders that are issued therefrom must weigh the cost of regulations against their benefits. Everyone who makes or installs airbags in cars, smoke detectors in office buildings, HVAC units in businesses and homes, and tamper-proof packaging for food and pharmaceuticals, just to name a few, has a job thanks to regulation. And when we don't have adequate regulations, bad things happen. We don't have to look that far. Look at our financial crisis. Look at the recession. A financial disaster was created by a lack of regulation and by erroneously relying on the narrow self-interest of corporate management to protect their own businesses, let alone the common good. And this is according to Alan Greenspan, because Mr. Greenspan told our Oversight Committee a few years ago, this is a quote, "I made a mistake in presuming that the self-interest of organizations, specifically banks and others, were such that they were capable of protecting their own shareholders and their equity in the firms." Last year, the Office of Budget and Management performed a cost-benefit analysis of federal regulations, which showed that the benefits of regulations far outweigh their costs. Between 1999 and 2009, the estimated cost of regulations were between $43 billion and $55 billion, while the estimated economic benefits were between $128 billion and $616 billion. That means during that 10-year period, the cost-to-benefit ratio of regulations was 1 to 2 based on OMB's lowest estimations and 1 to 14 based on OMB's highest estimations. So as we go into this great adventure about all of these regulations, we must look at the benefits of regulations, the economic benefits, the social benefits, the health benefits, if we're to come up with an accurate picture of the role of regulations in our society. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, it's now my pleasure to yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan.
The gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to thank the distinguished gentleman from California for yielding and for his good work on this resolution and a host of other issues in leading our committee. The President's executive order directing agencies to take into account the cost of cumulative regulations is an important step, moves us in the right direction, and something that we just frankly need to get an understanding of how the federal government should work relative to the private sector. Job creators do not live in a world where they are only subject to one regulation issued by one agency. Rather, job creators are subject to a myriad of regulations and compliance obligations enforced by the EPA, the Department of Labor, the IRS, Health and Human Services, and on and on and on. The utility sector offers a fertile ground to begin understanding how federal agencies should take into account the cumulative effect of regulations. From early 2009 to 2017, this industry will have to contend with no less than 35 separate regulatory deadlines. Those affected say looming regulatory changes have already caused 2 power plants to be shut down. The manufacturing sector. This industry is hit the hardest by cumulative regulatory costs, with per firm cost at over $600,000, $500,000 greater than the national average for all other industries. Small manufacturers bear a proportionally larger regulatory burden, with an estimated cost of $26,000 per employee, more than double the burden faced by other larger manufacturers. The impact of regulations is especially important on small business owners. They serve as both entrepreneurial leader, but also as the regulatory enforcer within their company. The more time spent complying with regulations is less time they can spend meeting the needs of their clients and their customers, growing their business, and most importantly, creating jobs. You know, I had an experience a few years ago. One of our manufacturers, very successful business owner, we were meeting, he wanted to meet with our U.S. Senator. I remember this meeting because I'll remember it for as long as, I'll remember forever. We were sitting in the meeting, and our constituent said to our U.S. Senator, he said, "Senator, we can outcompete anybody. We are so efficient at what we do. The way we manage our business, our efficiencies we put in place, we feel like we can outcompete anybody. What makes it tough to win in the international market, what makes it difficult to compete and grow jobs, what makes it really difficult is the stuff you guys do. And he pointed right at the senator, and it had an impact. He says it's all the things we have to do to comply. That's what makes it difficult to. The American worker, the American family, the American small, they can outcompete anybody. Let's just get government off their back so they can do the things that we've been doing in this country for 200+ years, grow our economy, grow jobs, put families back to work, put people back to work, and improve this situation. I look forward to the work that our subcommittee on regulatory affairs will focus on trying to understand the cumulative impact that regulations impose on the job creators. And with that, Madam Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman from Ohio yields back. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
We yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. TIERNEY.
Thank you,
Gentleman from
yielding.
Massachusetts is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think we're a little perplexed over here. There's nobody on this side of the aisle that doesn't feel that regulations ought to be reviewed. I don't think there's anybody on the other side that feels that way. And I think that everybody understands it's one of the roles of Congress, and particularly one of the roles of the Government Oversight and Reform Committee. It's in our rules. Every committee has already passed an entire plan for doing oversight. So essentially, the real question is we're spending 9.5 hours here today to ostensibly give authority that already exists. So we're not spending 9.5 hours on dealing with helping 14 million Americans who are out of work. Instead of it, we're not advancing any bill that would repair our economy or restore our manufacturing industry, or not ensuring the country's global competitiveness. We're not enhancing our education system. We're not enhancing or reinvesting our public infrastructure. We're spending 9.5 hours allotting authority that already exists on that, and that just doesn't seem to be a good use of the time of this House. And I think that's been noted over and over again. It didn't stop Chairman ISSA from issuing 170 letters looking into regulatory matters the other day. It didn't stop him from having hours of a committee hearing yesterday where we beat the same drum over and over again. Everybody understands that some regulation is sometimes taken to excess, and sometimes the enforcements are taken in the wrong direction. You know, I take a backseat to nobody. I spent 4 years as chairman of the subcommittee on foreign policy and national security. We had hearing after hearing exposing fraud, waste, and abuse in the billions in the Defense Department and related activities. So yes, let's do it, but let's not waste our time talking about what we're going to talk about. Let's get out there and have the hearings. The committee is set up for that. But let's also understand what's going on here. There's one side in this debate, my friends on the Republican side, who want to say, you know, the only factor to be considered when we're looking at regulation is its cost. And that's it. Well, if that were the case, and we only focused on cost, there'd probably be no regulations. But if we look at our history, we found it important and that there was undeniable progress when we implemented regulations on child labor, on civil rights protections, 5-day work weeks, cleaner lakes and rivers, clean air, seat belts and airbags, child-proof medicine caps, fire safety codes, and on and on. There's value in some of these regulations, and also we have to be balanced against the cost. And when, in fact, the Office of Management and Budget did that, as Mr. KUCINICH just noted, their report estimated that between 1999 and 2009, the cost of the regulations were about $43 billion to $55 billion, but they were outweighed by economic benefits that were between $128 and $616 billion. If you just look at the Clean Air Act, by some estimates, that act was accounted for $23 trillion in economic and health benefits, 30 times higher than the cost to businesses. The Clean Air Act has created jobs, lots of jobs. In 2010, 1.7 million Americans were employed in environmental technology industries. 119,000 environmental tech companies produced $300 billion in revenues in 2010. And we're exporting these technologies. In 2008, the United States exported $43.8 billion in environmental technologies, more than any other country in the world. So, Madam Speaker, let's be serious about this. We're talking about regulations. Let's talk about the cost and the benefits and do an analysis. And let's not waste 9.5 hours talking about what we already have the authority to do. I yield back.
Gentleman's time's expired. Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, in Section 2, Article 1, asking for regulations that impede private sector job creation, I'm just sorry the other side doesn't understand. That's not cost, that's jobs. And with that, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Kelly.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker, I'm here today because I represent those small businessmen that are trying to make a living in towns like Butler, Pennsylvania, and Erie, Pennsylvania, and Greenville. And I got to tell you, the rhetoric is absolutely off the charts. What we really need to see now are some results. And until we get government's boot off the throat of small business people and allow them to move forward, do we want to be in the game? Heavens yes, I want to be in the game. So does everybody else want to be in the game. And we need to realize that all these taxes that we create or that we're trying to take in come from businesses that are profitable and people who are working. So if we're talking about growing an economy, and if we're talking about cutting spending, and I do agree that cutting spending is important, we better wake up and start to smell the coffee. We have overregulated these people to the point that they don't want to be in this game anymore. We've got to wake up. I repeat that because we are missing the boat on a very vital thing that's happening right now in this country. We need to get on board with this. And I got to tell you, insiders in this beltway talk about too big to fail. I want to tell you what, for small business people, you know what we are? We're too small to survive because we can't get the help from the people we need. All we get is a lot of talk and a lot of over-regulation. Mr. Chairman, I thank you, and I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from Maryland.
May I inquire, Madam Speaker, how much time we have?
Gentleman from Maryland has 4.5 minutes remaining.
We grant the gentlelady from the District of Columbia, Ms. Norton, 2 minutes.
The gentlelady from the District of Columbia is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. The President has begun a review of regulations. You would think the majority would do something like declare victory. Instead, they have an oversight hearing prematurely, a one-sided one, from business, instead of joining issue by calling in the agencies one by one to see what kind of a review the President is in fact doing. I favor government for the good and welfare. Therefore, I have always hated government bureaucracy and regulations that make government, even the best of government, look bad. I headed a federal agency. I believe I will be more remembered for streamlining its processes than for the underlying mission. I eliminated a huge backlog of cases, settling cases which had always been carried to full stream. And guess what? When we started to settle them, we got more remedies. Instead, though, look at what the majority has done. They've changed the subject from jobs and reducing federal power. And one way in which they've done it is to spend the first month on bills usurping control of local power or trying to, and local funds from a local jurisdiction. That's the opposite of federal, of what they have claimed they wanted to do. They've introduced a harsh anti-choice bill. Fine. What is the District of Columbia and spending of its local funds doing in such a bill? Yesterday, they introduced a bill to wipe out the local laws of a local jurisdiction after the Supreme Court has now found them to be, after the courts have now found them to be constitutional. They've introduced a D.C.-only private voucher bill, not a national bill, after a compromise on vouchers for D.C. was already achieved, and even though the District of Columbia has the largest alternative has a home rule alternative, which is the largest alternative school system in the United States, almost half of our children in public charter schools. Our majority has taken regulations, a subject where there's a basis for areas of consensus, and polarized it.
Gentlelady, an additional 30 seconds.
Gentlelady is recognized for 30 seconds.
I'm grateful. The majority has taken regulation, a subject where there is a basis for areas of consensus, and polarized it. They have broken their promises on jobs. Look, no jobs bill. And of reducing federal power by trying to literally usurp power from a local jurisdiction and dictate to that local jurisdiction from the federal government what it should be doing. I thank the gentleman for yielding.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 1.5 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Sutherland.
The gentleman is recognized for 1.5 minutes from Florida.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I ask for unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Gentleman's recognized.
I'd like to thank the gentleman from California for yielding me time this morning. I rise today in support of this resolution, and I commend the gentleman from Maryland, the minority leader, for rising in support of this resolution. And I would urge the rest of the members on the other side of the aisle to follow their leader in support of this resolution. You know, as families struggle to pay their bills and small businesses falter, impact over regulation could not be more devastating than it currently is. I stand here today in supporting and representing the good, hardworking men and women of Florida's District 2. I will tell you in Florida, we stand at nearly 12% unemployment. It is a historic number. And I will tell you the regulations that are coming through the EPA are going to further destroy and hamper job growth in our state. The EPA has allied with environmental activists to finalize numeric nutrient criteria for rivers and lakes. These crippling regulations, due to take effect this year, will penalize the state of Florida and could possibly destroy 14,500 agriculture jobs just in our state, according to the Florida Department of Agriculture and the University of Florida study. It could cost cash-strapped government entities across my state $21 billion in new water treatment facilities. I met this week with a member from a local municipality that said they just completed a $17 million project, and if these regulations go into effect, that is going to be have to be repeated again, another $17 million on top of the $17 million that they've just implemented. So it is time for Washington to get out of the way and allow small businesses across my state and this great nation to create jobs. I yield the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Maryland.
Madam Speaker, we would just say one thing to the gentleman that just spoke, and that is that we agree with the gentleman from Maryland. We want a comprehensive look at these regulations. And with that, I'll reserve.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, it's my pleasure to yield to the gentleman from Idaho, Mr. Labrador. 2 minutes.
Gentleman from Idaho is recognized for 2 minutes.
Madam Speaker, I want to briefly speak about the impact of the overbearing Environmental Protection Agency has in my district. I want to begin by relating an anecdote that illustrates the arrogant and tone-deaf attitude the EPA has taken in its attempts to regulate almost everything that moves or breathes in Idaho's 1st Congressional District. The Environmental Protection Agency announced in the Federal Register a public meeting in Boise where my constituents could come and provide oral comments. Relying upon the EPA's notice in the Federal Register, my constituents attended to share their thoughts with the EPA, only to be told that oral comments would not be accepted. My constituents try to do the right thing and play by the rules, but when EPA writes the rule book in erasable or even invisible ink, my constituents become jaded and distrustful of the EPA and come to this body for assistance. They're done being treated unfairly by a federal bureaucracy that no longer seems to care if it even obeys its own rules. This body must no longer tolerate such actions. But we must also not tolerate the job-killing regulations that the EPA dreams to implement. Even though the current and past administrations have recognized that the Clean Air Act is not appropriate for regulation of greenhouse gases, the EPA nonetheless has chosen to ignore those findings and treat greenhouse gases as though they endanger the public health and welfare. EPA and other federal agencies led by the White House are also charging ahead with policies using questionable climate change science under the guise of protecting vulnerable or endangered species that they will do very little, if anything, to aid species, but will most surely empower federal bureaucrats and environmental lawyers. And these policies will further restrict access to our water and land and further hit our already struggling agriculture and resource-dependent communities. Finally, the EPA and National Marine Fisheries Service have ignored the best available data of farmers as they determine how pesticide registration affects salmon in the Pacific Northwest. In an era in which the administration's failed fiscal and energy policies are inflating food prices, EPA piles on with its procedures that add nothing but uncertainty to the process.
Time's expired.
Thank you very much.
Gentleman from Maryland.
Madam Speaker, we continue to reserve.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, can I inquire as to how much time we have remaining each side?
The gentleman from California has 10.5 minutes, and the gentleman from Maryland has 1 3/4.
And Madam Speaker, can I inquire, do I have the right to close?
Yes, the gentleman from California has a right to close.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. With that, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. McHenry.
Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I thank my committee chair for yielding me time. I appreciate his leadership. And I rise today in support of this resolution and recommending that we review regulations and the order from federal agencies that they submit and control in the private sector. Since the onset of the recession, the driving policy in Washington has been to grow our economy for the long term. Some of our colleagues believe that we can achieve this by growing the federal government. However, more government and more regulations do not lead to more jobs. In 1988, Ronald Reagan stated that at the end it was free enterprise, not government regulation, not high taxes or big government spending, but free enterprise that led to the building of a great America. Over the past 2 years, the American business owner has seen darker economic days than this country has seen in generations. Yet our businesses still push forward, innovating and adapting to the increasingly global marketplace that we live in. Our government must do the same thing. Astonishingly, a number of our colleagues believe the federal regulations actually lead to more jobs and more productivity. Some have even called for more federal regulation to spur job growth. Quite frankly, I think that's insane, and I think most Americans believe the same. After hearing from job creators yesterday in our Oversight and Government Reform hearing, and job creators in my district, it's clear that the best way to help small businesses, America's job creators, is to look in our own backyard to see what onerous regulations and wasteful spending programs are getting in the way of free enterprise. That means a renewed commitment to tough government oversight and transparency. That's what this resolution does. This chamber must remain committed to enacting policies based on the principles of Ronald Reagan, reducing the size of government, increasing its efficiency, and making it accountable to those it serves, the American people.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Maryland.
Might I inquire of the gentleman whether he has other additional witnesses?
Madam Speaker, I have at least one additional speaker plus closing.
Then we would continue to reserve.
Gentleman from Maryland reserves. The gentleman from California.
Is that who I'm introducing?
Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, with that I would yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Judge
Gentleman
Carter.
from Texas is recognized for 2
I
minutes.
thank the gentleman for yielding, and I want to commend the chairman and his committee for the hard work they're doing here today. And while we look at bad rules, Madam Speaker, already on the books, let's not take new, worse rules on in the future. With the split of the House and Senate, it will be a tough job to repeal existing regulations, and in light of the Senate's requirements of a 60-day votes to bring something to the vote in the Senate, it will be very difficult. But we have a special parliamentary tool to block new rules with the Congressional Review Act, which mandates a Senate vote on blocking new regulations of just 30 members of the Senate. So we can have closure in the Senate with only 30 senators joining us. Today we face new EPA attempts to shut down the Portland cement industry in our nation, costing thousands of jobs. We face EPA grab to take away Texas's ability to issue emission permits, undermining the economy of Texas and destroying job growth in our state. We face HHS scheme to kick small health insurers out of the market because they can't match the administrative cost of the mega insurance competitors. But if we use our majority in this body to disapprove these bad rules, we can then convince our 30 of our senators to join us and go along with it, to bring it to the floor of the Senate for a vote. On a straight up or down vote, I think we have a very good chance to stop these new rules that are in the pipeline. Madam Speaker, I urge all members to join our effort to use the Congressional Review Act to fight bad rules and save jobs. I thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Maryland.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, as I said a little bit earlier, this is non-controversial. We're on the same page, and the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Hoyer, said it quite appropriately. We believe in effective and efficient government. There's nothing more important. When government performs effectively and efficiently, we all benefit. And I think the President was right when he issued his executive order number 13563, when he said that we want to look at outmoded, ineffective, insufficient or excessively burdensome regulations to modify and streamline our rules. That's what we're all about. But I want to make sure that we do have that balance on both sides, because of the fact that the American people are depending on us to be their line of defense. And as Mr. Stanley Goose Stewart said, and here's a fellow who was a part of the Sago mine incident in West Virginia, and I'll close with these words, and he said this to our legislators in a letter. He said, "You were elected to represent the American people, but more importantly, you are Americans, and at the very base of it all, you are human beings. The safety of our American people should mean more to you than extra profits for big corporations. It seems wrong to justify the filling of corporate bank accounts with the blood of American workers and the tears of their families." With that, Madam Speaker, I yield back and urge all members to vote for the resolution.
Gentleman from Maryland yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to Dr. Gosar from Arizona at this time.
The gentleman from Arizona is recognized for 2 minutes.
Madam Speaker, red tape, the EPA, government regulations. When I travel my district, these words come up over and over again. These are not words of encouragement. These are words of frustration. Small businesses across Arizona are struggling to keep their doors open because government will not get out of the way. Enough is enough. Now is the time to make changes that will empower our nation and put our people back to work. Take, for example, the Navajo generating station in my district. They have the state-of-the-art technology that makes them one of the cleanest coal power plants in the country. Yet the EPA says this technology is not good enough. Out-of-touch bureaucrats at the EPA are threatening over 500 high-paying jobs in my district. Over 80% which go to the Navajo Nation, where unemployment is approaching 60%. The plant provides power to the major cities of Arizona and 95% of the power to the Central Arizona Project's canal, which in turn delivers 45% of the City of Phoenix's projected water demand and 80% of Tucson's projected water demand. The EPA's attempt to shut down the Navajo generating station will put Arizona's water and energy security at risk. What is worse, the Navajo generating station is willing to comply with the EPA, yet the EPA is imposing timelines that no businesses can reasonably meet. Why, may you ask? Because the EPA is more concerned with their agenda than they are about the people of Arizona. Today I stand here asking my colleagues, the Senate and the administration, to listen to the people of my district. We have no more time to waste. We need to rein in government before it puts the rest of our country out of business. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as may remain.
Gentleman is recognized.
In closing, Madam Speaker, the American people do not yet really know the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. But they probably know better the SEC, the FCC, the FTC, the Consumer Product Safety Council, and to be honest, I got really tied up in the rest of the letters they put here. None of them, I repeat, none of them are covered by the President's executive order. For whatever reason, the President limited his executive order to the non-independent agencies, not even calling on the independent agencies to begin a review. Madam Speaker, over the last half hour, we've heard again and again my colleagues on the other side of the aisle saying this is frivolous, it's not necessary. Yesterday they called the whole hearing with American job creators, many of whom had responded to AmericanJobCreators.com. They called them sort of anecdotal or frivolous or hyperbole. Madam Speaker, it's time that we take seriously the loss of American jobs. Today's resolution does have specificity, does deal with the fact that Americans are suffering and regulations are part of our competitive challenge. Madam Speaker, I take Steny Hoyer at his word that he supports this and wants to work together. I take the President at his word that it's time to do this review. I don't take the bureaucrats at their word that, like foxes guarding the hen house, if you go back and tell them to guard again more carefully, that you'll any more likely to have anything other than less chickens in the morning. Madam Speaker, We cannot assume here in the House that over the last 2 years, when Democrats controlled the House, the Senate, and the White House and did nothing to reduce regulations, just the opposite, increased them, and that the President, who currently is increasing regulation without one piece of legislation, trying to get card check through the back door and hundreds of other programs far beyond our demand, that if given the mandate to re-regulate what they've regulated, that they won't in fact use it as a chance to expand a liberal agenda in a way that will further hurt the American jobs. We must be there hand in hand with this administration to make sure that every change in regulations is followed up with binding law that will in fact help the American people get back to work. So Madam Speaker, I am absolutely convinced that this resolution is necessary as a first step to make it clear that the House of Representatives is fully committed to getting Americans working again. And AmericanJobCreators.com and other sites that are trying to collect this data from people who create jobs in America in the private sector, we are going to continue to gather and disperse those areas that American job creators are finding are impediments to their creating the jobs in America. Lastly, Madam Speaker, you will hear in the days and weeks to come about corporate profits in America, and you'll hear about the great profit growths of some of our best-known corporations. After yesterday's hearing, I went back and checked. Almost to a corporation, the growth in their profits has been disproportionately from overseas earnings on overseas labor and overseas development, meaning, Madam Speaker, do not look to corporate profits as the bellwether. Do not look to the stock market as a bellwether. American jobs are created when American companies are incentivized and given an opportunity to create jobs in America. That's what this resolution is about today. That's what the hearings and the markups will be in the days and weeks to come. That's the reason we cannot leave it to bureaucrats behind doors that created these problems, allow them to, in fact, reevaluate their own sins. So, Madam Speaker, I am delighted today to support House Resolution 72 and to urge its consideration and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from California yields back the balance of his time. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, at this time, I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman, the chairman of the Republican leadership, the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Walden.
Gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you to my colleague from Texas. I rise in support of this bill and the examination of the rules and regulations that create uncertainty and increase costs and disadvantage our businesses, farmers, and ranchers. My wife and I were small business owners for nearly 22 years. I know what it's like to sign the front of a payroll check and to deal with government rules and regulations. Here's a perfect example of what my farmers and ranchers face in Oregon. These are new rules that are coming out from the Environmental Protection Agency that are relying on what they even termed as a National Marine Fisheries Service document that was less than transparent. This affects new set-asides if you use modern chemicals and all to grow America's food and the world's food. These are new setback provisions that are being required in buffer zones that could, in some cases, be from 100 to 1,000 feet along any body of water, including intermittent streams. Now, if you're from sort of the dry side of Oregon, you have a lot of intermittent streams that only kind of flow with runoff and then they dry up. The practical effect, though, is that you could lose most of your farm land. This is an example run through their models of what this could mean if this rule goes into effect. And you would take from 108 acres, which is the whole area here, and you would begin to reduce down the buffers to where you'd be able to farm less than 10 acres. That means that in this farm you could lose upwards of this crop field now would produce $21,000 in income. When the federal government's rules, if fully implemented as described here, you'd be down to $1,500. You can't farm if you lose much of your farm ground and you go from 108 acres down to 10. This will occur all over the country, all over eastern and western Oregon, and it is an enormous federal government land grab that could take between 40 and 67% of farmlands would be affected in Oregon. And in this case, it's an 83% reduction if taken all the way to the 1,000-foot buffer along these intermittent streams. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to examine this and many other rules and regulations to look at their practical effect on the ground throughout the countryside, on the men and women who raise our food and produce the jobs in America. And with that, I yield back my time.
Gentleman's time's expired. The gentleman from South Carolina.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'll yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, back when I was campaigning for members all across the country, I heard Republicans constantly talking about jobs. Despite the fact that the Democratic majority in the 111th Congress brought America back from the brink of a depression and presided over 10 straight months of private sector job growth, with Republicans obstructing every step of the way, Republicans insisted they would focus on jobs, jobs, jobs. But something must have happened to the Republicans over the holidays, because for the full month since the opening of the 112th Congress, the Republican majority has done literally nothing to create jobs. Republicans have held votes on 11 bills that do things like denying insurance to people with pre-existing conditions and denying security funding to the area around the United Nations building in New York. Not a single one of these votes have created a single job for a single American. Republicans are holding a host of committee hearings on issues like restricting access to women's legal health services and rolling back injured patients' legal rights. Not a single one of these hearings has created or will create a single job for a single American. Today, we are talking and talking about a resolution that will instruct committees to conduct oversight, which they are supposed to do no matter what. This resolution would not create a single job for a single American. This week, as our economic recovery is just gaining steam, the Republicans are proposing a spending bill that will curtail American innovation and clean energy and cut the number of cops on our streets. This will result in Americans losing their jobs and America being less safe and less prepared to compete in the 21st century global economy and create jobs years into the future. Republicans talked last year about how they would focus on jobs. But it seems that when they decide to focus on jobs at all, they are focusing on how to eliminate jobs. Madam Speaker, I come from a district and a state where unemployment is unacceptably high, and too many people have been out of work for much too long. I honestly wish the Republican majority would focus on common sense, pragmatic ways to create American jobs. If they decide to do this, they will find me a willing partner. But let's stop these shenanigans like we're seeing here today. I reserve the balance of my time and yield back.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, the cynicism on the part of the Democratic leadership is interesting. It was just announced yesterday that the Obama health care plan will net lose America 800,000 jobs. But it's also true it will create millions of jobs but it destroys millions more in net 800,000 jobs. The Republican Party is here because of the miserable failure of the Democrat leadership in this House of Representatives and our President, who has ruined millions of jobs in this country. And that is why the Republican Party is here to do something about that. Don't worry, we'll be adding the millions of jobs. Madam Speaker, at this time I'd like to yield 1 minute to a freshman member of the Republican leadership, gentleman, Mr. Scott.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, the gentleman from Texas, for yielding me a time. Madam Speaker, every single day Americans are asking, where are the jobs? The answer is simple. Current regulations are destroying jobs. Last year alone, government regulations cost businesses more than $1.7 trillion. As an example, this chart illustrates the significant burden that the Clean Air Act imposes on pulp and paper businesses in my district. These are the regulations that could impact the industry in the next 10 years with a price tag of $17 billion job-killing dollars. $17 billion. Another example, the FDA has threatened General Mills with regulating Cheerios. Cheerios. Why? Because they don't like the health claim benefits on the box. If we want to create more jobs in America, let's get the government out of the way, and we can start with the 157,000 pages of regulations. I yield my time, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields his time. The gentleman from South Carolina.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Andrews.
The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 3 minutes.
I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank my leader from South Carolina. The prior gentleman who spoke is right. Americans are asking, where are the jobs? And the majority is saying, we'll get to that later. This week, the first thing that they did was to try to rush to the floor without hearings or consideration an extension of the Patriot Act, which is a very serious and profound issue for the country. And it didn't work. Then they brought to the floor a bill that was supposed to recover money from the United Nations, which we're all for, but the Congressional Budget Office says it wouldn't actually save any money. The New York City Police Commissioner said it would be harmful to his efforts to protect the people of New York against terrorism that might come up around the United Nations. And I think the rest of the world said, why is the United States rocking the boat at a time when there is profound global crisis going on in the most dangerous area of the world? So that didn't work. They then brought to the floor this bill, which commendably says that committees should look at whether there are regulations that don't make any sense, that are harmful to jobs and businesses in our country. They're right. We should do that. We're already doing it. In other words, each committee adopts what's called an oversight plan when it meets. It talks about all the different things that it wants to do. In education and the workforce, we did that. Armed services, we did that. So we've now spent 9.5 hours debating whether we should keep doing something we're already doing and bring to the floor someday in the distant ozone future actual bills that might actually reduce such regulations. Now, if that really weren't bad enough, the majority really switched this week from ignoring the jobs problem to worsening the jobs problem. Because out of the view of the public on this floor, in their private meetings, they're planning to bring to the floor next week a bill that will dramatically reduce investments that I think most people wouldn't reduce investments. Let me give you an example. Now, we only know what we read in the newspaper because my understanding is they have yet to post their spending bill online, which they promise to do 72 hours before it comes up. But you can project this out that they're probably calling for a 30% cut in things like air traffic controllers. Now, I want you to think about this, Madam Speaker, for a moment. Putting aside the obvious safety consideration, I don't think any of us would put anyone we love or care about on a plane we think was safe. That's obviously true on both sides of the aisle, and I'm not suggesting the other side wants to do that. But there are consequences to not having a full complement of air traffic controllers. And beyond the safety consideration is an economic consideration. How can you have a thriving economy? I would ask for an additional minute.
I'll give you another minute.
I thank
The
my
gentleman is
friend.
recognized for an additional minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. How can you have a thriving economy if people feel like they can't fly safely? I come from a state, New Jersey, which prides on being the medicine chest of the world in our pharmaceutical industry. How can you have a cutting edge in pharmaceutical products if you lay off people from the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, that review the applications for new drugs? How can you have a supermarket industry that's thriving and employs millions of people in agriculture and food industries if the people who inspect our meat and our milk and our food are not there? Now, these are questions that are going to be debated and answered next week here. They do have an effect on jobs, a profoundly negative effect on jobs. We understand that there is a common responsibility to enact sensible restraint on what our government spends. That's why Democrats balanced the budget when President Clinton was in office. That's why Democrats passed a pay-as-you-go statute. And I would urge that we return to the business of the House and yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this time, I'd like to yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from South Dakota, member of the Republican leadership, Mrs. Nome.
Gentlelady from South Dakota is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Madam Speaker, it is all about the jobs, and that's exactly what this Republican majority has been fixated on ever since we've become control of this House. I will tell you that specifically, we recognize that what we need to do to create jobs in this country is to provide certainty, tax certainty, and right here in this resolution, certainty that we are being clear, that we are going to address the regulations that are killing jobs in this country, that the Democratic Party has allowed to happen over the last several years. We're going to change that today. I rise in support of this resolution because small business owners in South Dakota and across this country are losing more of their bottom lines to red tape this year and in the past several years than they have in decades. Federal agencies continuously overstep their powers and impose new regulations which not only raises the cost of doing business, but feeds the uncertainty of doing business here in America. Today's economy is uncertain enough. The least we can do for our job creators is to provide them with stability by eliminating unnecessary and costly burdens. The EPA is ripe with examples of these burdens. This agency wants to penalize farmers for dust on their operations and what they produce. You can bet any South Dakota farmer tending their livestock, baling hay, or harvesting their crops would agree this is absurd. I want to thank you for letting me voice my opinions on these regulations. We will address the problem. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady's time's expired. The gentleman from South Carolina.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. May I inquire as to how much time I have?
Gentleman from South Carolina has 7.5 minutes remaining. Gentleman from Texas has 10.5 minutes remaining. The gentleman from South Carolina.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from California, Ms. Barbara Lee.
Gentlelady from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the gentleman from South Carolina, our Assistant Democratic Leader, for yielding and for his leadership. I strongly oppose H.Res. 72. This does nothing to create jobs. Secondly, it does nothing to address really the regulations and the policies that impact the poor and the long-term unemployed. Now, I submitted an amendment to this resolution that required each standing committee to review administrative actions or policies that reduce poverty and address the needs of the chronically unemployed. However, the Republican majority on the Rules Committee refused to include this modest but important provision. I'm forced to conclude that my Republican colleagues don't quite understand the desperate conditions that confront the poor and long-term unemployed. Within the resolution, I see a list of directing action to committees to review regulations that impede, discourage, hurt, harm, or limit the ability of agencies to achieve specific policy objectives. However, there are no directions to address the pain and the misery experienced by millions of poor people and the chronically unemployed. Now, in the United States, the number of persons below the poverty line increased from 39.3 million in 2008 to 42.9 million in 2009. In California, the rate increased from 4.8 million in 2008 to 5.1 million in 2009. Yet the resolution before us gives marching orders to committees to identify regulations that impede, fail, hurt, or limit. I cannot understand why the majority does not want to identify regulations that fail, hurt, or harm the poor and the chronically unemployed, nor limits the poor from achieving middle income status. This is not a partisan issue, and we must all remember that poverty affects constituents that reside in Republican and Democratic districts. Madam Speaker, may I have an additional 30 seconds?
I yield the gentlelady an additional minute.
Madam Speaker, thank you very much for yielding. The new majority promised to provide a comprehensive plan to restore America to prosperity and to create jobs. Unfortunately, this resolution does not do anything to deliver on that promise. And furthermore, I hope that this body, both Democrats and Republicans, will begin to focus on the fact that we have million people who are poor, who are low income, and who are chronically unemployed. A criterion, we need standards so that we can look at how what we do here on this floor elevates and lifts up people who are below the poverty line and helps them move into middle income status. This resolution does not do that. It's really a bunch of rhetoric. As I see it, I really can't figure out what it's about. It does nothing, and it certainly does nothing to create jobs for those who we care about. Thank you again, and thank you, Mr. Assistant Leader, for the time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, at this time I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the favorite son of the state of Illinois, the gentleman, Mr. Roscom.
Gentleman from Illinois is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentleman for yielding. You know, today the folks on the other side of the aisle are actually arguing in the alternative. We heard the gentleman from New Jersey say, well, Republicans, at least you're finally getting to it. You don't need this resolution. And the gentlelady from California says the resolution isn't good enough. I think what is clear is one thing. What we've seen from the past 2 years have been failure. I mean, it's ironic. There's nobody, Mr. Speaker, that's on the floor today defending the economic policies of the past 2 years, the stimulus that promised 8%, and obviously the over-promising and under-delivering. Jobs are job one of this Congress. It is imperative that we focus, and what we're doing with this resolution is putting an imprimatur of the work on these committees, saying your priority is to go through chapter and verse on these regulations and separate them out. The ones that don't add value, the ones that aren't making people safer, the ones that are complete nonsense, let's focus in on them, highlight them, and remove them. We have to remove the barriers to job creation. That is our responsibility. That is what should be bringing us all together. And I urge the swift passage of this resolution and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from South Carolina.
May I inquire as to how many speakers left on the other side?
Gentleman from Texas.
I appreciate the gentleman asking, and thank you very much. We are now concluded on our side, except for me closing.
You've concluded?
That would be correct, sir. I will
Very good.
close.
I would like to yield to close on our side. Mr. Conahan, I would like to yield him the balance of the time.
Gentleman from Missouri is recognized for the remaining balance of time.
I think it's 4.5 minutes.
Which is 4.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We just spent the past 2 days telling committees to do their jobs. Why aren't we focusing on creating jobs? Creating jobs for the American people. Let me be clear. I'm in favor of a strong and vigorous debate here on cutting red tape and finding bipartisan solutions to our nation's problems. But to pretend that common sense oversight measures to protect families and businesses are inherently burdensome with no benefit fails to acknowledge the reality of the financial disaster that was brought upon this country on Wall Street. It fails to acknowledge the disaster of the BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. It fails to acknowledge toxic toys and drywall coming in this country. It fails to acknowledge the increase in deadly foodborne illnesses from lax oversight of our food safety system. And it fails to acknowledge what the American people want us to work on right now, and that's creating good jobs to support their families. I believe that we all want what is best for the people we represent, although we often have different ideas about how to get there. But to structure a debate that is so one-sided that attempts to gloss over the very events that created this recession is not serving the American people. Let's look at the entire picture. I will be offering a motion to recommit that will ensure we place a high priority on protecting the safety of America's food supply, safe drinking water, and the safety of children's toys in this country. This is and should be an essential function of our nation's government. Just last year, cadmium, a known carcinogen, was found in amounts in excess of 90% in children's bracelets imported from China. This stuff happens far too often, and without strong oversight and common sense regulation, American children would continue to be put at risk. I don't believe any of my colleagues here are against protecting public health and ensuring that we are doing our duty as elected officials to protect our constituents. That's why I'd like to reach out to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle and ask them to join us. Join us in this motion to recommit, which will instruct House committees to make the health and safety of our families a priority also. Preserving common sense safety standards is just as important as reforming overly burdensome regulations. Let's work together to help create the environment that protects our citizens. Let's move quickly to the jobs agenda that Americans want and deserve. Americans are still waiting for this House to take up the jobs agenda. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Texas.